Hello students, good morning. I hope I'm audible, guys. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Right. So in our previous lecture, we had talked about the rise of the Marathas. जो debate था, there were 6 points of view. क्या conclusion निकाला था हमने? Was the rise of the Marathas the result of religion? No, rather it was a result of socio-economic and political factors. It was the result of the growing expansion of the Mughals in the Deccan region, which created a political vacuum that the Marathas were able to fill. The rise of the Marathas was the result of the local history of the Deccan region over the preceding 2 centuries, where the Marathas had become more and more involved in active military and political matters, and this allowed them to replace the Deccani Sultanates as the new regional power that could challenge the Mughal rule. Now, दो aspects और बचे हैं मराठास के. One is the nature of the Maratha political system. One is the nature of the Maratha fiscal system. Now, as we had discussed in Monday's class, nature of Maratha political system can be studied in 3 phases. Under Shivaji, that is from 1764 to 1713. Under the Peshwas, that is 1713 to 1761, and finally after the third battle of Panipat from 1761 up to 1818, right? During the first phase, the Maratha kingdom was characterized by centralized administration and royal absolutism. However, from 1713 onwards, the office of the Chhatrapati became a nominal head, right? A real power was transferred into the hands of the Maratha prime minister, who was known by the title Peshwa. Before 1713, the Peshwas were being appointed by the Chhatrapatis. They were not hereditary officials. But from 1713 onwards, the hereditary line of Peshwas emerged. So this is known as Peshwa rule. It was characterized by a slight feudalization of power, a slight fragmentation of power. And the process of feudalization was completed following the sudden defeat of the Marathas in the third battle of Panipat, which gave a major jolt to the system. Following this, different regions of the now much larger Maratha Empire started to assert regional autonomy, and the Maratha Empire lost its centralizing tendencies. It became properly feudal. A system emerged wherein power was shared between 5 important Maratha Sardars, these being the Peshwa with his seat at Pune, and the 4 others being the Scindias, the Holkars, the Gaikwadas, and the Bhosles with their own seats. They coordinated with each other on some important issues, but largely maintained almost complete autonomy. So the Peshwa remained the nominal head of this entire system, but the regional Sardars became almost absolute sovereigns. This period is known as the period of the Maratha Confederacy. It was characterized by complete feudalism, wherein each of the regional sardars on their own accord were able to undertake their own foreign policy initiatives. So this also witnessed the largest expansion of Maratha territory. Okay? So it also coincided with the period of Maratha expansionism. This period was also the dying stages of the Mughal Empire, and therefore, as Mughal authority receded, the Marathas filled the vacuum. They pressurized not only the Mughal Empire proper, but also its successor states such as Hyderabad, Bengal, Awadh to gain more influence and territory in their domains. Okay? This was also the period when the Marathas encroached into the northwest. They reached Rajputana and even Punjab, right? It was this that led to their conflict with the Abdalis, with the Afghans. Both of them were fighting for control over Punjab, right? So ये एक general pattern है. Now let us look at the characteristics of administration in each of these phases. So we are going to discuss this portion through this PDF मैंने आप लोगों को अभी भेजा नहीं है, मिल जाएगा. ठीक है. Now the nature of the Maratha political system can be divided into three main phases. Phase 1 during the 17th century, centralized nature of the Maratha political system under Shivaji. Shivaji created a centralized state machinery characterized by his absolute rule. That means he was a despotic ruler. There were no tangible or real checks upon his authority. Shivaji as an absolute ruler with all powers concentrated in his hands. However, he was still a benevolent despot. What is the difference between a benevolent despot and a tyrannical despot? A tyrannical despot is not concerned about the welfare of his subjects. But Shivaji's administration elicited a great degree of concern for the welfare of his ordinary subjects. So he created the foundations of a welfare state. Why do you think it was important for him to do this? Why not ignore the interests of the common people? Because he had come to power with the support of the common people. He had come to power on the back of a popular movement led by ordinary Maratha peasants and small landowners, right? So this was a product of the process of Shivaji's rise, which had been facilitated by the support of the common people. Can you give an example? He had liberated them from the exploitative clutches of the Mirasidars and Deshmukhs, Watandars, etc. By suppressing the Deshmukhs, he had liberated the ordinary peasantry from their exploitation. ठीक है? And this welfare approach is going to be most visible in Shivaji's revenue policy. Is this clear? Now, one element of administrative centralization in an absolute machinery, ये हमने pattern देखा है right from ancient India throughout medieval India, is the creation of a system of cabinet ministers, portfolio system of administration. Since the king is supposed to be in charge of all subjects of administration, and as the state started becoming more and more elaborate, as the population and territory started growing in size, this administrative task became more and more complex. Therefore, it was unrealistic for a single ruler to perform all these tasks personally. Therefore, it was important for the kings to create a mechanism whereby he could delegate power to underlings, to subject experts in such a manner that he would still be able to control them. Okay? That they should not be able to breach his control. And Shivaji did this by instituting the Ashtapradhan system. Asht means 8. Pradhan is chiefs or ministers. So what was the Ashtapradhan system? It was the portfolio system created by Shivaji. Okay? It consisted of a council of 8 ministers that were appointed directly by the king himself, by the Chhatrapati himself, by Shivaji. Were these hereditary ministers or were they appointed ministers? They were appointed ministers. They were not hereditary. How were they paid? Were they paid in the form of hereditary land grants or cash salaries? अगर ऑब्जेक्टिव एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव सेंट्रलाइजेशन है, सो विच वुड बी द बेटर चॉइस, हेरिडिटरी ग्रांट्स या फिर कैश? कैश सैलरीज, राइट? सो दे वर पेड in cash salaries. Now, Shivaji had laid down the foundations of a new Hindu kingdom in the region of Maharashtra. So, do you think that he is going to borrow some elements from Brahmanical theory of kingship or not? कुछ तो borrow करेंगे ही करेंगे. But would he be able to completely replace the Mughal and Persian influence that had been quite dominant in the Deccan region for hundreds of years by this point? पूरा नहीं हटा पाएंगे, right? And as such, the Ashtapradhan system was partially borrowed from Brahmanical as well as Persian conventions. ठीक है? Now, is this a unique thing for this time, or is it a natural outcome of the natural process of historical development? It is a natural outcome. Okay? So you find such an element in almost all Hindu kingdoms of this period. be it the Marathas or the Rajputs or even Mysore or the rulers of the south, that is the Nayakas. तो सब जहां पर आपको इस तरह का एलिमेंट दिखेगा, a blending of a Brahmanical and Persian conventions. Is this clear? And this is very clearly visible in the nomenclature of ministers and officials. Okay? Now, while a conscious effort was made to name the ministers and officials on the basis of Sanskrit and Persian vocabulary, Sanskrit and Prakrit vocabulary, since it is associated with the indigenous Hindu culture of India, but the Persian influence on administration could not be completely done away with. ठीक है? And ये जो nomenclature of ministers and officials है, this is found in a particular work that was commissioned by Shivaji at the time of his coronation. This is known as the Raj Vyavahar Kosh. What was it? It was an administrative manual. तो जैसे अभी सिविल सर्विसेज मैनुअल एटसेट्रा होते हैं ना, ये उस समय का एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव मैनुअल था. It consisted the nomenclature or the designations of various ministers and officials. उनका hierarchy define किया गया था. Their salary parameters had been defined. The parameters for their promotion or transfer had been defined. Their jurisdictions were clearly defined, and standard operating procedures in specific conditions were also defined in this work. ठीक है? Now the Raj Vyavahar Kosh is also important for one more thing. क्या दिखाता है ये? That Shivaji had created an institutionalized bureaucracy. What is the significance of this institutionalized bureaucracy? Institutions का अपना एक कैरेक्टर होता है, अपना एक मेमोरी होता है, right? Even if Shivaji was no longer in the picture, what is this institution going to do? It is going to work according to its memory that had been created originally by Shivaji. So this gave permanence to Maratha administration. ठीक है? And this permanence is probably one of the most significant administrative contributions of Shivaji. Why is this? Because it is this institutional and administrative permanence that allowed the Maratha Empire to continue to survive even when it was facing an extreme crisis. After the death of Shivaji, a civil war had broken out. The Mughals had even succeeded in capturing and torturing his son to death, the next Chhatrapati, that is Sambhaji Maharaj, right? But the system was strong enough, it had permanence enough that it was able to sustain itself, it was able to rectify itself, bring it back to the correct path. And although the Maratha administration underwent a radical transformation in the subsequent decades and centuries throughout the 18th and early 19th century, तो पहले सेंट्रलाइज से पेशवा एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, देन फ्यूडल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन आया, बट ये जो बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर है ना, दिस अष्टप्रधान सिस्टम, दैट कंटिन्यू टू सर्वाइव। इज दिस क्लियर? एंड दैट इज व्हाई छत्रपति शिवाजी इज रिमेंबर्ड not only as a great warrior but also a great administrator and organizer। ठीक है, एमजी रानाडे ने किससे कंपेयर किया है शिवाजी को? with Napoleon, right? So like Napoleon, who was not only a great general but also a great administrator and organizer. In fact, his civil administration and civilian reforms outlasted his military victories and the empire that he created. The elements of Napoleon's administration are still visible in French administration to varying degrees. वही इम्पैक्ट छत्रपति शिवाजी के रिफॉर्म्स ने मराठा एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन पे लाया। इज दिस मच क्लियर? नाउ हु वर दीज 8 मिनिस्टर्स? वन वाज पेशवा, ही वाज द प्राइम मिनिस्टर एंड headed the Ashtpradhan. There was an Amatya, he was the auditor. There was a Mantri who was the record keeper. There was a Sachiv who was in charge of the royal secretariat. So he was the chief secretary. His responsibility was to oversee the other subordinate officials of Mughal bureaucracy. Sumant was the foreign secretary. Senapati, the commander in chief. Pandit Rao, in charge of religious affairs. And Nyayadhish, he was the chief justice, right? Mantri was also known as Vakinavis, right? So हमने देखा था ना that blending of Persian as well as Sanskritic elements, Brahminical elements, so that is clearly visible over here also. ये distribution समझ में आया है? Now all these ministers except the last two, that is Pandit Rao and Nyayadhish, were supposed to maintain their own military contingents as well and even lead military expeditions. ठीक है? So the Peshwa, Amatya, Mantri, Sachiv, Sumant and Senapati, they were not simply civilian officials, rather they were civilian and military officials. Does this tell you anything about the nature of the Maratha state? Like almost all medieval states, the Maratha state was also a war state. It depended upon victories in war, both for its survival as well as its expansion or growth. Okay? So this tells us that the Maratha state was a war state or military state. Therefore, a primary concern for the ruler would be to maintain his military strength, because he knows that if he is not able to do this, then his empire would be threatened both by external as well as internal forces. ठीक है? Now, M.G. Ranade, because of Shivaji's administrative reforms, concludes that like Napoleon, Shivaji in his time was a great organizer and builder of civil institutions. His system was an autocracy of which he himself was the supreme head. His administration principles included the welfare of his subjects. ठीक है? तो क्या क्या हमने सीखा है about Maratha administration created by Shivaji? First of all, it was centralized. It was despotic. It was based on the portfolio system of administration. It was a synthesis of Brahmanical and Persian conventions. It was based upon institution building, or it was institutionalized. And it was benevolent. ठीक है, तो समराइज करना हो अगर शिवाजी का एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, तो ये कुछ कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स आप हाईलाइट कर सकते हो. Now, as we have mentioned, Shivaji's state was a war state, and therefore the military aspect weighed very heavily in the priorities of administrative affairs. Now, before Shivaji, the Marathas were a very formidable power already. However, they did not have a centralized standing army. The army was made up mostly of part-time soldiers who worked on their fields for half the year and gave active service during the dry season. Who used to control these part-time soldiers? The regional Watandars, right? So, Maratha military power was fragmented before Shivaji. Now, Shivaji wants to centralize control. What is he going to do? He is going to destroy the military power of his subordinates, of the Watandars and Deshmukhs. And he is going to do this by raising a large centralized army. Shivaji introduced a regular standing army under a commander-in-chief known as a Senapati. Okay? And under Shivaji, the Maratha military power was constituted by three kinds of soldiers. Number one, the soldiers maintained by the crown. Okay? That is the royal forces. Secondly, the soldiers maintained by the officials, that is the members of the Ashtpradhan, the local Havildars or Subedars, etc. And finally, Pindaris. Now, Pindaris were the traditional Maratha soldiers. जो part-time soldiers हमने mention किए हैं ना, who were part-time farmers and part-time soldiers, 6 महीने अपने cultivation करते थे, 6 महीने लड़ाई करते थे. They were the Pindaris. Initially, they were being controlled by the regional hegemon, that is the Deshmukh or Watandar. But now they became integrated with the Maratha centralized military system. So command over Pandaris was either in the hands of the crown if they were living in the core regions of the empire, or in the hands of the officials, the local havildars, who used the forts to command large arable tracts from where much of the Pindari strength was drawn. Is this clear? So they were brought under the control of the crown or royal officials. So during the time of Shivaji, which of these three categories do you think would have fielded the largest number of soldiers? सबसे ज्यादा soldiers crown maintain करता होगा या officials के अंडर होते होंगे या पिंडारीज होते होंगे? Pindaris, right? So even under Shivaji, the Pindaris continued to provide the bulk of the Maratha fighting strength. Were they receiving regular salaries from the crown? No. Regular salaries were given to regular officials, regular soldiers maintained by the crown only, right? Rather, they were induced to serve the crown or their local officials by offering them a share of war loot, war booty. So it was a common practice for the Marathas to raid their neighboring territories, the territories of their enemies, and from the frontier provinces of their enemies, they used to extract war booty on an almost annual basis. The Pindaris were induced to join the Royal Maratha soldiers and soldiers maintained by the Maratha officials by offering them a large share of war booty. They were given a share of the war booty. And later on, what happened? The system of extracting war booty was also institutionalized by introducing a new tribute known as chauth. क्या होता था चौथ? It refers to एक चौथाई or 1/4. Now, chauth was extracted by the Marathas from their neighboring enemy kingdoms as a guarantee against the harassment or plundering activities of Maratha forces. तो एक हफ्ता वसूली की तरह हो गया. Protection money, though we are not going to attack you, right? Now, with the introduction of chauth, what is going to happen? ये सारा का सारा पैसा किसके पास जाएगा? Is it going to be distributed between the crown and the Pindaris, or is it going to go only and only to the crown? It is going to go only to the crown. So, chauth represented a centralized tribute mechanism, right? What is going to happen to the Pindaris in this scenario? Are they going to be happy or unhappy? Unhappy, because they have lost a valuable source of income. And this led to resentment among some sections of the Pindaris. This was a basic flaw of the chauth system. By centralizing the tribute system, it had weakened or it had harmed the interests of the Pindaris. And as a result, what is going to happen? Stress create hoga, right? And administrative centralization is going to become weaker. And this is what happened during the second and third phases. तो दोबारा से क्या इंट्रोड्यूस किया जाएगा? The distribution of choth between the frontier commanders and the royal forces and the crown or the office of the Peshwa. So from the period of the Peshwas, एक नया system introduce किया गया that suppose this is the Maratha domain with the Peshwa at the center and let us suppose Hyderabad में raid करना है. So some soldiers are going to be provided by the Peshwas, some soldiers are going to be provided by the frontier commanders. Their purpose is to extract chauth, right? Or to extract war booty. यहाँ पे plunder किया. Some portion is going to remain with the local commanders, while some portion is going to go to the central treasury. What happens if this kingdom, ये Hyderabad जो है, it has agreed to pay an annual tribute or chauth? So once again, इससे जो भी bordering provincial officials होंगे या फिर frontier commanders होंगे, they are going to continue getting their share of the chauth collected from the neighboring territories. ठीक है? So this was a workaround that was found out later on. But the introduction of the chauth system created pressures in the traditional you can say pattern of soldiery in the Maratha kingdom, in the Maratha domain. It disrupted the profession of soldiery in the Maratha domain, thus creating pressures and leading to the weakening of administrative centralization. Clear hai itna? Right. Now, apart from land forces, Shivaji also understood the importance of maintaining a strong navy. Why? Because he had seen what the Portuguese had done to Bijapur and the Vijayanagar Empire, right? So Portuguese had come and taken away all the important ports on the western coast. Shivaji realized the importance of building a navy for the purpose of trade as well as defense against the Europeans, right? So trade and defense के लिए navy को शिवाजी ने develop किया. Large sums of money were invested in the development of the navy. Navy was also important from a strategic perspective. What was the power relationship between the Marathas and their other regional adversaries? Absolute terms में stronger powers कौन थे? Marathas or their adversaries? No. Absolute terms में अगर आमने सामने की लड़ाई होती खुले मैदान में तो कौन जीतता? Probably the Mughals. They had the resources of the entire Indian subcontinent at their disposal. They had expertise ranging over more than 300 years in open warfare. They were masters of cavalry maneuvering. They had access to superior artillery also, right? Now, in order to balance the scales, kuch na kuch tactics adopt करनी पड़ेंगी. One tactic adopted by the Marathas in the early stages was to use the local terrain of the Western Ghats to their advantage. They were familiar with it. The Mughals were not. तो Mughals का strategy क्या होता था कि किसी भी एक region को जाकर के invade करेंगे, वहाँ के local rulers को हराएंगे and they are going to occupy that entire region in order to pacify it, in order to suppress any potential rebellions, right? लेकिन मराठास के डोमेन में ऐसा करना बहुत मुश्किल था. क्यों? क्योंकि मुगल आर्मीज एक लंबे स्नेक लाइक कॉलम में एक से दूसरे छोर तक मार्च करते हुए जाते थे थ्रू दी नैरो माउंटेन पासेस अलोंग दी वेस्टर्न घाट्स. नदी के किनारे से जा रहे हैं तो देयर फ्लैंक्स वर ऑलवेज एक्सपोज्ड. मराठास क्या करते थे? दे वुड टेक एडवांटेज ऑफ द लोकल टेरेन. जो अगल बगल की हिल्स हैं वहां पे छुप करके मुगल सोल्जर्स को पहले ऑब्जर्व करते थे एंड व्हेन द अपॉर्चुनिटी प्रेजेंटेड इटसेल्फ दे वुड डार्ट डाउन फ्रॉम दीज हिली एनक्लेव्स, अटैक द मुगल्स, kill a few soldiers, loot their material, disrupt the logistical train and then retreat back into the hills, right? So this is what allowed the Marathas to continuously resist the Mughals. The Marathas also realized that the Mughals were navally underdeveloped. Okay? And an important way that the Mughal Deccan campaign could be disrupted or hampered would be to hamper their economy and trade, because वहां से बहुत सारा resource आ रहा था. That was those ports were also being used by the Marathas to supply their troops in the Western Ghats. तो अपने डोमेन से चाहे जंजीरा, चाहे सूरत, हर जहां पर जाकर के अपनी नेवी से उनके पोर्ट्स को डिस्टर्ब कर डिस्ट्रॉय कर सकते हैं, उनके शिप्स को सीज कर सकते हैं, देयर गुड्स कुड बी बर्न्ड और सैंक, राइट? एंड दिस इज गोइंग टू डिसरप्ट द एंटायर वॉर इकोनॉमी ऑफ द मुगल्स. सो नेवी का स्ट्रेटेजिक पर्पस भी था. इट वाज मेंट टू बैलेंस द स्केल्स अगेंस्ट formidable adversaries, that is the Mughals. Now, Shivaji also realized that whoever controlled the hill forts of the Western Ghats would have command over the entire region of Maharashtra. Now, forts occupied an important position in Shivaji's Swaraj. Swaraj क्या था? It was the territorial domain of the Marathas. That means it referred to that territory where Maratha sovereignty prevailed. ठीक है? So it was the self-ruled areas. जहां पे मराठा रूल एक्सटेंड करता था, जहां पे मराठा ऑफिशियल्स प्रेजेंट थे, जहां पे मराठा एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन एस्टैब्लिश्ड था. ठीक है? Now, Shivaji envisioned the whole of India for Hindus. So he had the vision of Hindav Swaraj, right? Later it became transformed into Maratha Swaraj. Now, if this vision was to be fulfilled, then who had to be overcome? बाकी इंडिया किसके हाथ में था? मुगल्स के हाथ में था. Therefore, the entire region that was out of Maratha control, that was known as मुगलिया डोमेन. ठीक है? तो स्वराज्य हो गया अपना टेरिटरी, मुगलिया हो गया एनिमी टेरिटरी. ठीक है? Did not matter whether it belonged to Hyderabad or the Rajputs or Awadh or Bengal. सब बाकी सारा मुगलिया टेरिटरी बोल देते थे. ठीक है? Now, स्वराज्य की खूबी क्या थी? That it was located in an extremely isolated region which was hard to reach, because it was separated from the rest of the subcontinent by impenetrable mountains. That is the Western Ghats. These were heavily forested और यहाँ पे कोई established road networks वगैरह नहीं होते थे. Therefore, forts, especially those which were situated on top of prominent hills which commanded the surrounding region and controlled the mountain passes which punctuated these Western Ghats, were important to control. So that is why he decided that in forts पे strong control रहना चाहिए. He began appointing an official known as Havildar to टेक चार्ज ऑफ दीज फोर्ट्स. इन फोर्ट्स को बोलते थे हवेलीज, तो उनका जो इंचार्ज है वो हविलदार हो गया फॉर देयर एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन. एंड ही वाज असिस्टेड बाय अदर ऑफिशियल्स सच एज सूबेदार एंड कारखानी. राइट? नाउ यहाँ पे आपको क्या दिख रहा है? द सेम थिंग दैट अकबर हैड डन इन प्रोविंशियल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, दैट इज इंट्रोड्यूसिंग सेपरेशन ऑफ पावर्स. That a single official is not going to be able to concentrate all powers in his hands. other officials of equal or superior rank are going to be there in order to check the ambition and power of the Havildar. Multiple officials provided checks and balances. Clear hai itna? So these were the important developments when it came to military administration. And finally, we have the introduction of a centralized revenue system. Now, for the purpose of revenue collection and administration, Shivaji divided his kingdom into a number of provinces, further subdivided into parganas and villages, which formed the lowest unit of administration. Revenue settlement was based on the system of measurement and survey of land, right? This was derived from Malik Ambar's system. Malik Ambar, the Wakil Sultanate of Ahmednagar from 1602 to 1622, had introduced the system of a survey and measurement of land. Now, survey and measurement of land, traditionally rulers क्यों introduce करते थे? In order to introduce revenue centralization, in order to reduce the role played by local officials, local hereditary elites or the intermediaries, and create a direct contact between the producer and the state, right? So this was introduced by Shivaji as well. इस सिस्टम को क्या बोलते थे? The रैयतवारी सिस्टम, ठीक है? Because the revenue settlement was now to be made directly by the state with the individual peasant or raiyat. Now, assessment of land revenue was done by after a careful survey of the land, and the state demand was fixed at the rate of 30% of the total produce. So, rate of land revenue was fixed at 30%. Now, besides land revenue, Shivaji also imposed various taxes on other goods and activities also, such as on various professions. So for services, trade के ऊपर taxes लगाते थे, and social and religious functions के ऊपर. To establish his supremacy over the Deshmukhs, Shivaji ने क्या proclaim किया? That he is the head of all Deshmukhs in the Swaraj region. So he is the Sardar of all the Deshmukhs or Sar Deshmukh. And on the basis of this, as a matter of right, he introduced a new tax called Sardeshmukhi. It was to be collected at the rate of 10% of total revenue. Collected from the lands of the Sardeshmukhis. ठीक है? तो देखो, arrangement ऐसा है that suppose this is the total agricultural land of the Maratha Empire. A portion of this is going to be the crown's land, right? यहाँ पे a direct relationship is going to be created between the state and the peasants. Both revenue assessment and collection is going to be overseen by royal officials, and the rate of revenue was fixed at 30% of the estimated produce after a proper survey and measurement of the land. Okay? While the rest of the land is the hereditary grants or the hereditary lands held by the Deshmukhs. यहाँ पे भी the rate of revenue is going to be the same, 30% only, right? So whatever is being produced from the ground, the farmer has to pay to the Deshmukh a sum amounting to 30% of the total produce. But ये जो टैक्स आया है, ये ट्रेडिशनली पूरा का पूरा किसके पास रहता था? देशमुख के पास ही रहता था. Now Shivaji introduced Sardeshmukhi. What did he say? That 1/10 of this entire revenue that has been collected, you will have to pay to me as Sardeshmukhi. यानी कि 3% of the revenue generated from the Deshmukh's lands were now to flow to the royal treasury as well. ठीक है? Now, in 1674, when Shivaji became the Chhatrapati, he introduced a new gold coin known as Hon or Han. ठीक है? Now, it is estimated that from Sardeshmukhi alone, Shivaji's revenue income was more than 1 crore Han. ठीक है? तो सारदेशमुखी से इनकम इनका 1 करोड़ हन से ज्यादा होता था. To contextualize it, 1 hun was roughly 3.6 grams in weight. And Mughals का जो सिल्वर रुपी था, that amounted to roughly 1 hun was equivalent to roughly 40 rupees. तो यानी कि 1 करोड़ हन कितना रुपया हो गया? 40 करोड़ मुगल रुपए के बराबर, right? In fact, the Marathas had also issued a silver currency, also known as the rupee, which was considered to be an imitation of the Mughal silver rupee. So roughly 40 crore rupees annually were coming to the state in the form of Sardeshmukhi only. And the proportion of Sardeshmukhi was greater than the proportion of total revenue being generated by the Crown's land. ठीक है? तो Crown's land एक बहुत बड़ा पोर्शन होगा टोटल एग्रीकल्चरल लैंड का या बहुत माइनर पोर्शन होगा? It was a relatively minor portion, a very minuscule portion of the total agricultural land. Much of the land still continued to be in the hands of the local Deshmukhs or Watandars. Clear hai? Now, Shivaji also sought legitimacy through some ideological means. क्या किया इन्होंने? ये कौन से कस्टम्स में लेजिटिमेसी ढूंढेंगे? इस्लामिक कस्टम्स में या हिंदू कस्टम्स में? हिंदू कस्टम्स में. हिंदू कस्टम्स में पॉलिटिकल पावर कैसे लेजिटिमाइज किया जाता है? थ्रू दी वर्णाश्रम धर्मा सिस्टम, वेयर इट इज क्लियरली डिफाइंड दैट ओनली one varna has the right to rule, that is Kshatriyas. So what is he going to do? He is going to Kshatriyaize himself. At the time of his coronation, Shivaji claimed to be a Kshatriya, linked his lineage with the Sisodiyas of Mewar, claimed that he was a descendant of Rana Sanga and Maharana Pratap of Mewar, adopted the title Kshatriya Kul Vatsama, that is the jewel of the Kshatriya race, of the warrior race, adopted titles such as Hendav Dharmodharak and Gau Brahman Pratipalak, right? So what was he doing? In this way, Shivaji sought religious legitimacy, further he also opened the doors of upward social mobility for ordinary Marathas who could also claim Kshatriya status and thus higher social status now. And prepared the ideological framework of a religious struggle against the Islamic Mughal rule. Okay? So in one stroke, he was able to do all these things. He was able to legitimize his coronation in accordance with religious propriety. He was also able to champion the cause of his most ardent followers, that is the Maratha peasantry, who could also now claim Kshatriya status and thus became even more enthusiastic in his support. And he also prepared for an open confrontation on the framework of a religious conflict against the Islamic Mughal Empire. Okay? Thus, he prepared the doors for the Maratha political movement conflict against the Mughals to become a popular religious move. Clear? तो ये थे फर्स्ट फेज के कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स. सेकेंड फेज, फ्यूडल सिस्टम emerged under the Peshwas. Now, हुआ क्या that in 1680 Chhatrapati Shivaji died. Following which his son Sambhaji became the next Chhatrapati. But he was also captured and executed by the Mughals in 1690. Now, Shivaji had two prominent wives. The son of one of his wives was Sambhaji Maharaj, who had become the next Chhatrapati, whereas the second wife was, forgetting her name, her son was Raja Ram, right? So in 1690, there emerged two different Chhatrapatis. One was Raja Ram, that is the stepbrother of Sambhaji, and Shahuji, that is the grandson of Shivaji and son of Sambhaji. However, Shahuji was captured following the death of his father and was taken by the Mughals to Delhi. He was imprisoned at Delhi. Right? In the meanwhile, Raja Ram married Tarabai and had his own son, right? Following which Rajaram died and Tarabai, a formidable figure, emerged as the real power behind her son by acting as his regent. Aurangzeb died in 1707, and following this, the Mughals pursued a policy of amnesty with the Marathas. Sambhaji was released and returned to Maharashtra, right? What is going to be the result? There are now two contenders for the throne. First is the son of Rajaram backed by Tarabai, and the second is Sambhaji Maharaj, right? So, in 1707, the Maratha civil war broke out. ठीक है? कौन? हाँ. He is the grandson of Shivaji and sorry, ये संभाजी नहीं, शाहू जी. थोड़ा नाम में कंफ्यूजन हो गया. शाहू जी महाराज हैं ये, ठीक है. तो शाहू जी was released, resulting in a civil war between the faction led by Shahu ji and Tarabai. In 1713, Shahu ji appointed a prominent Brahmin military leader and official, Balaji Vishwanath, as his Peshwa. Now, during this lengthy period of conflict and uncertainty, administrative centralization in the Maratha kingdom had weakened. The Deshmukhs had started to assert their traditional powers, right? Result क्या हुआ था? That some Maratha Deshmukhs, some Maratha Sardars had become immensely powerful. Among them, Balaji Vishwanath was the most powerful. By appointing Balaji Vishwanath as the Peshwa, Shahu ji had played a master stroke. Why? Because Balaji Vishwanath did not come alone. He also came along with a party of other prominent Deshmukhs. Therefore, the balance of power tilted in favor of Shahu ji, right? But what initially appeared to be a master stroke ultimately proved to be a disaster for the house of Chhatrapati. Why? Because Balaji was able to secure the throne for Shahu ji, but he emerged as the real power behind the throne. ठीक है? क्या बन गए थे बालाजी विश्वनाथ? He had become the kingmaker. So, Shahu ji won the civil war, but came under the influence of Balaji Vishwanath, who emerged as the kingmaker. Now, traditionally, the appointment of the Peshwa was a matter of privilege for the Chhatrapati. But was Shahu ji in a position to exercise this privilege from this point onwards? Nahi. And Balaji Vishwanath became the permanent Peshwa. Following him, his sons and successors would become Peshwas. The office of Peshwa became hereditary in nature, right? And with this, the rule of the Peshwas began. Okay. Due to the weak successors of Shivaji, Ashtapradhan and the office of the Peshwas became hereditary. In 1750, this arrangement wherein the Peshwa was the real authority and the Chhatrapati was simply the nominal head, it was formalized through a treaty known as the Sangola Agreement. The Peshwa emerged as the real and effective head of the state, whereas the Chhatrapati became a Roy Faineant, that is, do nothing king. The centralized state system is also going to weaken, and feudal polity based on landed aristocracy emerged. Why? Because Balaji Vishwanath also depended upon the support of the other Deshmukhs. So therefore, he would have to share power with them as well. Deshmukhs became important and Maratha chiefs like Nimbalkar, Holkar, Gaikwad, Bhosle, etc. became powerful. However, they were all headed by the Peshwa. Okay? So during the second phase, what are we going to witness? क्या important developments हुए हैं? First of all, the rule of the Peshwas has started. That means royal autocracy has been appended. So it represented the end of royal autocracy. Administrative centralization would also become weaker as the regional Deshmukhs become more and more assertive. So it was the end of administrative centralization, and as the Deshmukhs become more assertive, they are going to strip away more and more sovereign authority. Therefore, a feudal system would start replacing the element of centralized administration. Okay? Not only revenue system is going to be feudalized and decentralized, but even military power is going to become decentralized, right? So the Marathas are going to gravitate back towards their original position. तो जैसे पहले था वैसे दोबारा से होना जाएगा. And this transformation is going to be completed following the third battle of Panipat, right? So the third battle of Panipat was a major blow to the office of the Peshwa, since the large since there was large-scale destruction of Peshwa armies at Panipat in 1761, therefore Peshwa's position as compared to the other Maratha Sardars became weaker. They are now going to assert even more autonomy, even more independence. So the feudal system which began under the Peshwas culminated in the Maratha Confederacy, which consisted of 5 major houses. The Peshwa with his office at Pune, Sindhyas with their center at Gwalior, Gaikwads with their headquarters at Baroda, the Bhosles at Nagpur and the Holkars at Indore. Now, nominally, the Peshwa remained the head. However, the Maratha chiefs or the Sardars, such as the Gaikwad, Holkar, Sindhya, and Bhosle, became almost independent. They became almost sovereign. So, there emerged a number of parallel powers, as these chiefs were almost autonomous in their rights, which considerably undermined the power of the Peshwas. Okay? Now, although the office of Peshwa would continue to be in the hands of the same Bhat family to which Balaji Vishwanath belonged, but the offices of all the other Ashtrapadhan members are going to be divided between the other important houses. तो सेनापति एक से आएगा, न्यायाधीश एक से, पंडित राव एक से आएगा, etc. etc. And they are also going to become hereditary offices, right? In fact, from 1761 onwards, cohesion within the Maratha domain was maintained by a feudal council at Pune, consisting of representatives from each of these Maratha Sardars. This feudal council was known as the 12 भाई. नाम के लिए 12 हैं इसमें, लेकिन नंबर यूज टू वेरी. कभी 12 होते थे, कभी लेस देन 12, कभी मोर देन 12 होते थे. नाउ nominally, who is going to be the head of this entire confederacy? The Peshwas of Pune. However, in reality, whoever was able to influence this council, this feudal council, would enjoy real authority. But his authority over the council is still not going to be absolute, because all these powers were relatively evenly matched. Now, they had the objective of expanding their domains, but instead of fighting among themselves, largely they decided to attack their neighbors. Okay? And thus, there was a rapid expansion of Maratha domains. Okay? Now, try to think on the map of India कि ये powers कहाँ पे रहे होंगे उस समय, right? And try to think of the political map of India at this point of time. कौन से areas already Marathas के control में थे, कौन से Marathas के control में नहीं थे. And on the basis of this, tell me the names of the two most powerful groups among these. Two most powerful elements among these, जिन्होंने सबसे ज्यादा expansion किया होगा. एक तो ग्वालियर में रहा होगा, नॉर्थ इंडिया, अवध, बंगाल की तरफ इन्होंने एक्सपेंड किया होगा. और दूसरे इंदौर. Why? Because they were able to expand towards Gujarat also, towards the Deccan also, Hyderabad also, right? So they were the ones who led the Maratha initiative of expansion. ठीक है? And ultimately a conflict is going to emerge between these two. दोनों किसके ऊपर कंट्रोल एस्टैब्लिश करने की कोशिश करेंगे? पेशवा के ऊपर, so that they could both get the upper hand in the feudal council. ठीक है? And this emerging conflict is ultimately going to lead to the second Anglo मराठा वॉर. ठीक है. The Peshwa Bajirao II would enter into an alliance with the Scindias of Gwalior and make moves towards Yashwantrao Holkar. Holkar is going to come to Pune, defeat the Scindias and try to imprison the Peshwa. Peshwa is going to escape और कहाँ जाएगा? Basin. He is going to run to the Bombay governor जो कि बसीन में था उस समय, and he is going to sign the subsidiary alliance treaty. This is going to lead to the unification of the remaining Maratha chiefs who are going to declare war against the British, and this was the second Anglo-Maratha war. Okay? So it was this arrangement which not only led to the rapid expansion of the Maratha domains but also brought them into increasing conflict against the British. Clear? So ये था the three-phase evolution of the Maratha political system. समझ में आया है? Right. Next, we have the Maratha fiscal system. Now, as we have already mentioned, Shivaji introduced the Rayatwari system. That was the system based on survey and measurement of land, where survey, measurement as well as collection in many cases was conducted by royal officials. It was based on the system of Malik Ambar, who had introduced it in Ahmednagar. New revenue assessment was completed by Annaji Datto in 1679 for this purpose. So रेवेन्यू असेसमेंट मतलब जितना भी आर्बल ट्रैक्ट्स हैं उनको मेजर किया जाएगा, उनकी सॉइल क्वालिटी को अकाउंट में लिया जाएगा, एंड द रेवेन्यू डिमांड इज गोइंग टू बी फिक्स्ड. Shivaji also strictly supervised the mirasidars, that is those with hereditary rights in lands. Now, traditionally, they were able to do as they wished in their own domains. Describing the situation, Sabhasad, who was a Marathi scholar of the 18th century, writing roughly 60-70 years after the death of Shivaji, he wrote in the 18th century that these sections paid to the government only a small part of their collections. As a consequence, the Mirasidars grew and strengthened themselves by building bastions, castles, and strongholds in the villages, enlisting footmen and musketeers. This class became unruly and seized the country. Shivaji wanted to centralize control, therefore he introduced the Rayatwari system and also destroyed the bastions, the fortifications, and forced the Mirasidars to submit. Okay? He imposed Sardeshmukhi upon them. Right? Apart from land revenue, the Marathas also had other sources of revenue, such as revenue from forests, customs, excise duties, mints, etc. For example, permits were sold for cutting timber from forests and gathering forest grass, bamboo, wood and wild honey. तो forest produce के ऊपर टैक्स लगता था या फिर परमिट बेचा जाता था, लाइसेंसिंग फी लिया जाता था. State also granted licenses for private mints to be approved to approved goldsmiths who were required to pay a royalty on the royalty to the state. Some other taxes were also imposed, such as tax on irrigated land from wells. तो wells के ऊपर tax लगाया जाएगा. House tax is going to be charged, recovered from everyone except Brahmins and village officials. Annual fee for testing of weights and measures. So this was a task done by royal officials. उसके लिए एक fee charge किया जाता था. Tax on marriages and even widow remarriages was charged. Tax on sheep and she buffaloes, तो यानी कि grazing tax भी charge किया जाता था. A pasturage fee, so for use of the common pasture, a fee was charged. A tax on melon cultivation on the river beds, so for using the river beds, a fee was charged. Succession duty, that means inheritance tax, and a town duty, that is goods entering a particular town would have to pay a toll, right? So apart from land revenue, the Marathas also collected a large category of other taxes. Then Marathas में मोकसाज, जागीर्स और सरंजम्स बांटने का भी एक दस्तूर था, राइट? Mokasas, Jagirs and Saranjams were synonymous terms used in the Maratha territory for military tenures. तो जैसे जागीर्स दिए जाते थे मुगल ऑफिशियल्स को फॉर रेजिंग अ मिलिट्री एंड मेंटेनिंग इट, वैसे ही ट्रेडिशनली द मराठास वर गिवन द मोकसास, जागीर्स एंड सरंजम्स बाय डेक्कनी सल्तनट्स। ठीक है, तो जो डेक्कन के सुल्तान्स थे, दे वांटेड द मराठा सर्विसेज। हाउ डिड दे पे देम? थ्रू मोकसास, जागीर्स और सरंजम्स। व्हाट वर दीज? These were tenures, that means these were land revenue assignments that were transferred to the Marathas in lieu of their military services. The size of the mokasas or jagirs or saranjams would depend on the services provided to the sultans. तो जितना बड़ा मिलिट्री कंटिजेंट कोई ऑफिशियल फील्ड करेगा, जितने सोल्जर्स कमांड करेगा, उतना बड़ा उसको जागीर मिलेगा, राइट? These were military tenures, and although they were theoretically temporary and transferable, that means the mokasadars could be transferred from one region to the other, and theoretically they could be confiscated, but in reality they were hereditary and permanent in character. Okay? So the Maratha Sardars were able to entrench themselves permanently in their local domains. Officials were largely paid in the form of mokasas or jagirs in lieu of their services. And it is interesting to find the presence of the practice of subletting of jagirs, a feature totally absent in North India. तो मुगल जागीर जो होते थे, जागीरदार जो होते थे, वो अपनी जागीर्स को सबलेट नहीं करते थे, यानी कि उनको पार्सल करके किराए पे नहीं चढ़ाते थे। लेकिन जो मराठास के जागीरदार या मोकसादार्स थे, they used to do it. Mokasadars, like the mansabdars of North India, also had dual ranks, जात और फौज रैंक। तो जात रैंक हो गया जात रैंक, एंड फौज रैंक हो गया दी सवार रैंक्स, राइट? जाट denoted personal pay, while फौज was given for maintenance of troops. The revenues were assigned to Mokasadars only after deducting सारदेशमुखी, चौथ and बटाई। ठीक है, now शिवाजी क्या करेंगे? Does he want to continue paying his officials in the form of land grants? No. He wants to centralize power. Therefore, he is going to abolish this system. He discontinued the practice of granting mokasas, saranjams or jagirs and instead preferred to pay his officials in cash. However, soon after Shivaji's death, his son Raja Ram revived the practice of granting mokasas. लेकिन अब क्या करेंगे? मोकसा ग्रांट करते समय सारदेशमुखी, चौथ और बटाई वाला प्रपोर्शन उससे हटा दिया जाएगा। ठीक है, there was a tendency on the part of the mokasa holders to convert their grant as hereditary grants. ठीक है, तो hereditary grants को इनाम या फिर वतन बोला जाता, to make it hereditary. And the scholar A.R. Kulkarni says that this tendency was feudal in characteristic. ठीक है, तो टसल क्या था बिटवीन फ्यूडलिज्म एंड सेंट्रलाइजेशन? शिवाजी के पीरियड में द पीक ऑफ सेंट्रलाइजेशन, फॉलोइंग हिज पीरियड देयर वाज अ डिक्लाइन ऑफ सेंट्रलाइजेशन वेयर द टेंडेंसी ऑफ फ्यूडलिज्म वाज बीइंग लेड बाय द मोकसादार्स। ठीक है, देन वी हैव इनाम और वतन लैंड्स। सो इनाम लैंड्स या फिर वतन लैंड्स ऑलमोस्ट सिनोनिम्स की तरह यूज किए जाते थे। They were revenue-free assignments made to the pious, needy, and the class of scholars. However, although they were nominally revenue-free, but Inam lands were also not completely tax-free. Out of the total revenue that was generated from the Inam lands, 1/3 to 1/4 of the revenue was to be given to the state, depending on the nature of the Inam. Right? दो तरह के इनाम होते थे, दीवान निस्बत इनाम और गांव निस्बत इनाम। दीवान निस्बत इनाम was made by the center through a सनद। सनद जैसे कि मुगल्स में फरमान होता है ना, रॉयल ऑर्डर, रॉयल डिक्री, वैसे ही मराठास में सनद होता था। यानी कि फॉर्मर was granted by the state through the सनद, दीवान निस्बत, और जो गांव निस्बत है वो नाम क्या सजेस्ट कर रहा है कि लोकल विलेज कम्युनिटी अपने कुछ सर्विस प्रोवाइडर्स को ग्रांट करती थी, राइट? The latter was made by the village community. It was also known as the Hangi Imam and was granted to village artisans and servants. Now, in the Maratha society, रूरल सोसाइटी, एक सिस्टम होता था, अ पेट्रन क्लाइंट रिलेशनशिप, जैसे कि नॉर्थ इंडिया में जजमानी सिस्टम होता था ना, दैट एवरी विलेज इज गोइंग टू हैव अ मैनोरियल सिस्टम, जहां पे एक जो लोकल जमींदार है उसका घर होगा एंड सराउंडिंग एरियाज में कई सारे पेजेंट्स होंगे एंड सर्विस प्रोवाइडर्स होंगे. These service providers are not going to till the land, they are not going to work the land, but are going to provide essential services to both the local जमींदार and other peasants. ठीक है, तो ये जो जमींदार हो गया ये इन सर्विस प्रोवाइडर्स का पेट्रन हो गया एंड these service providers are the clients of the zamindar. The zamindar was known as the jajman, right? ऐसे ही मराठी विलेजेस में ये जो सर्विस प्रोवाइडर्स होते थे देवर हेरिडिटरी बाय प्रोविजन. ठीक है, एंड दे वर नॉट बीइंग पेड बाय द लोकल विलेज कम्युनिटी इन द फॉर्म ऑफ लेट अस से गुड्स और कैश, रादर दे वर पेड फॉर देयर सर्विसेज इन द फॉर्म ऑफ ट्रांसफर ऑफ लैंड. सो विलेज का कुछ कम्युनल लैंड होगा that was permanently transferred, or portion of that was permanently transferred to these village artisans. अब in Maharashtra this system was known as the balutedari system, and ये जो बलूटेदार्स होते थे these were the hereditary rural service providers. Now theoretically every village had a total of 12 balutedar families. ठीक है, so there were 12 such artisans or service providers, and included hereditary professions such as potters, barbers, carpenters, weavers, leather workers, etc. And how were they paid? In the form of इनाम लैंड. कौन सा इनाम? दीवान इनाम या फिर गांव निस्बत इनाम? गांव निस्बत इनाम. और देहंगी इमाम. ठीक है, इतना समझ में आया है? ठीक है. Vatan, on the other hand, was a service tenure given to the holder in lieu of his services to the state. Vatans were largely held by village officials. ठीक है, लेकिन ये गांव निस्बत इनाम में नहीं आएगा. दिस वुड कम इन द कैटेगरी ऑफ दीवान निस्बत इनाम. ठीक है, विलेज हेडमैन इसमें होगा, दैट इज द पाटिल और मुकद्दम. विलेज अकाउंटेड कुलकर्णी, the Changula or assistant of the Patil, the Shete Mahajan or the village market officer, and the Mahar or the village watchman, temples, priests, etc. They would be given Vatan tenures by the state through a Sanad. So they would be granted Diwan Nisbat Inam, right? Vatan in practice, these were hereditary and permanent. Vatan and Inam were used as synonyms in Maharashtra, right? Now, हुआ क्या? That following the death of Chhatrapati Shivaji, जो जागीरदार या फिर मोकसादार्स थे, who were receiving jagirs, mokasas or saranjams, they also tried to have their jagirs, which were theoretically impermanent, that is temporary, non-hereditary grants, converted into watan or inam grants in order to make them hereditary in nature. And how was this possible? Because यही मोकसादार्स ये वाली पोजीशंस को एंजॉय कर रहे थे, विलेज हेडमैन या अकाउंटेंट या फिर शेते महाजन और महाड़ एटसेट्रा. क्लियर? So they tried to have their grants become hereditary. So tendency of feudalization was there. Evolution of the revenue policy. Shivaji introduced a system of collecting a share of actual produce on the basis of land survey and measurement. Fixing the demand according to the availability of irrigation facility was a practice that was as old as Manu and Kautilya, but the classification of land according to fertility and actual state of cultivation was introduced for the first time in this region by Malik Ambar, right? So it was an adaptation of Malik Ambar system. Under the Peshwas, what happened? The system of survey and measurement was largely abandoned. There was decentralization of control. Rather, they preferred to make grants of land on long leases and on a fixed state demand. So they used to transfer the right of collecting revenue for a long period of time to a single official, a single Deshmukh, and in return they demanded a fixed amount annually. The state demand as well as mode of payment of land revenue was not uniform. So lack of centralization में non-uniformity आ जाता है, diversity आ जाता है, and varied from region to region. There was an incentive to expand agriculture also, to incentivize cultivators to bring more and more land under cultivation. The land newly brought under cultivation was taxed lightly, तो उसको tax holiday या tax concession दिया जाएगा. In 1772, Madhav Rao Narayan II announced that half of the land that has been brought under plough recently would be given in इनाम. तो इनाम लैंड में आधा लैंड ऐसा होगा जो कि barren है, uncultivated, and for the remaining half rent-free concessions were offered for 20 years. So if some farmer wants to expand cultivation into an area that is rocky or barren or is forested, then he would be granted a tax concession of 20 years, following which a reduced tax would be charged for another 5 years. So tax holiday of almost 25 years was given. Okay? So a similar strategy that was adopted by Akbar in North India. Apart from this, the revenue machinery also had built-in welfare mechanisms. In times of famine, drought, plunder of crops or failure of crops, क्या होता था? The tax collection was either suspended or मोहलत दी जाती थी. Remissions of land revenue were granted. To save the cultivator from clutches of money lenders, the state also granted tagai loans. So in order to prevent the farmers from falling into the clutches of money lenders, state emerged as the money lender. Concessional loans देने लग गया, known as the tagai loans, right? Was a similar practice also visible in North India? तक्कवी loans, उधार loans देता था state, right? तो similar practice यहाँ पे भी. Thus, the revenue system of the Marathas was based on the principle of security of the taxpayer. However, the benevolent system was upset by Baji Rao II, who introduced the system of revenue farming, that is ijaradari. That means the entire arable tracts were simply parceled up into different regions and auctions हुए, नीलामी हुई, bids were invited कि कौन इसको खरीदेगा and in return कितनी बोली लगाएगा. So if somebody says that I will ensure that this region provides the state let us say a sum of 10 lakh rupees, तो उसको bid दे दिया जाएगा if he is the highest bidder. The state is going to get guaranteed 10 lakh rupees annually from that, but the ijaradar, the person who has brought that bid, is he going to be satisfied by collecting only 10 lakh rupees? नहीं, वो उससे बहुत ज्यादा टैक्स करेगा. एंड फाइनल बर्डन किसके ऊपर पड़ेगा? पेजेंट्स के ऊपर पड़ेगा, राइट? So this system is known as the इजारादारी system or revenue farming system, introduced by Bajirao II. Apart from this, we have two other taxes, Chauth and Sardeshmukhi. What were these? These were introduced by Shivaji and used by the subsequent Maratha rulers as well to obtain treasure or wealth from enemy territories and from the Deshmukhs respectively. Chauth from enemies and the Sardeshmukhi from Deshmukhs. Chauth tha kya? Shivaji demanded from the subjects of his enemies a tribute roughly equivalent to 1/4 of the estimated revenue of the province to save themselves from the harassment of his armies. तो इसको हमने पहले भी डिस्कस किया है, एक हफ्ता वसूली की तरह का है. If you don't want our armies to invade your kingdom, kill your people and loot your property, अपने आप से एक छोटा अमाउंट हमको दे दो. कितना अमाउंट मांगा? Roughly 1/4 of the total revenue collected from the frontier regions, which would generally come under attack of the Marathas, right? For doing this, he captured the rich people of the enemy territory and compelled them to agree to this ransom. It is estimated that the income of Shivaji from Chauth alone was approximately 90 lakh huns. Chauth was made famous under Shivaji, but it was not introduced by Shivaji. It was introduced by the Koli Rajas of Ramnagar. These were rulers of the Konkan region. ये Chauth collect करते थे Portuguese से, right? The Koli Rajas were defeated by Shivaji, and Shivaji tried to extract Chauth from the Portuguese as well. This led to conflict between the Portuguese and the Marathas. कभी कभार Portuguese मान जाते थे, दे देते थे willingly, but they always resented it. ठीक है? Now gradually, the Marathas began imposing the levy on a regular basis, even from Mughal territories over which they had claim or indirect control. तो मुगल का एक सूबा था डेक्कन, राइट? तो डेक्कन में 6 प्रोविंसेस थे, खानदेश, बेरार, बालाघाट, अहमदनगर, बीजापुर, गोलकोंडा, और एक था मराठा डोमेन. मुगल का इन्फ्लुएंस वहां से खत्म हो रहा था, and ultimately the Marathas were able to obtain a sanad from the farman from the Mughal court, allowing them to collect Chauth from the entire province of Deccan, from the 6 provinces of the डेक्कन. ठीक है? तो सबसे पहले पोर्चुगीज के ऊपर लगाया, फिर उसके बाद बाकियों के ऊपर भी लगाना शुरू कर दिया. Sardeshmukhi, it was imposed by Shivaji in his own domain, that is Swaraj, on the basis of the claim that he was the hereditary head, chief of all the Deshmukhs, that is Sardeshmukhi. And it was claimed by Shivaji as a matter of right, unlike Chauth. It was based on the claim that as the hereditary Sardeshmukh, he was entitled to compensation for protecting the welfare of the people of the state. ठीक है? So as the chief, he was protecting the other Deshmukhs and they have to repay him, compensate him. However, reality differed from theory. Why? Because the Sardeshmukhi was collected not only from Swaraj but also from those regions which were paying Chauth. ठीक है? So it was collected from all areas which paid Chauth as well. Right. And finally, we have a debate about Chauth. क्या debate है? What was the nature of the Chauth? M.G. Ranade क्या बोलते हैं? Chauth was similar to Wellesley's subsidiary alliance system. क्यों? क्योंकि मराठा जिससे भी Chauth कलेक्ट करते थे, एक implicit guarantee उसमें होता था that the Marathas are going to protect that person or that ruler from foreign invasion. So they became the protectors of areas from which they collected this tribute. Subsidiary alliance system में क्या था? That any Indian power which entered into a subsidiary alliance treaty with the British were guaranteed of military and political assistance in the case of an internal rebellion or external attack, right? Same cheese M.G. Ranade ने बोली that it was there during the under Chauth system. In the time of the Peshwas, the Mughal Emperor's sanction was secured to collect Chauth and Sardeshmukhi from the 6 subas of the Deccan, for which Marathas agreed to serve the Mughal government with 15,000 horses and pay a small sum as a fee. ठीक है? तो मुगल्स ने क्या बोला that okay, you can collect Chauth and Sardeshmukhi from the entire region of Deccan, but you will have to serve us with 15,000 horses and horsemen और एक छोटा सा नजराना देना पड़ेगा, right? Thus, the enemy resources were gradually exhausted and the Marathas were unable to extend their influence. So with this, the entire region of the Deccan came under Maratha control. Mughal influence ended over there. Marathas became protectors of this region. This fact makes M.G. Ranade say that Chauth was not a mere military contribution without any legal obligation, but a payment in lieu of protection against the invasion of a third power. He says that this could be compared with Wellesley's subsidiary system. In this system, the ruler of a native state, if he chose to sign the subsidiary treaty, had to keep a British force in his territory and pay for its maintenance. The East India Company, in its turn, undertook the duty of protecting the ruler against external invasion and internal rebellion. So Marathas were not simply collecting money and not giving anything in return. क्या दे रहे थे रिटर्न में? The guarantee of security. And ये security हमें कहाँ पे देखने के लिए मिलता है? In this contract कि 15,000 horses से इस region की security को आपको defend भी करना होगा, right? However, in Shivaji's system, thus there was a tacit understanding to protect the state that pays Chauth from foreign aggression. Although explicitly ये mention नहीं है कहीं पे, लेकिन implicit है उसमें that Marathas are going to guarantee the protection of those states which agreed to pay Chauth. However, Maratha leaders could not pursue it to its logical end and provide actual protection to these states. In other words, under the subsidiary system, the control of the British over the other party was far more complete and exacting than the Maratha system. Simply means that the subsidiary alliance system was much more institutionalized, much more sophisticated, and much more effective. The British explicitly mentioned their privileges as well as their liabilities with respect to their subsidiary allies, and they were able to maintain their relationship with the subsidiary allies in a much more permanent manner, right? So their control over the subsidiary allies became more effective. Marathas were the pioneers of this system, and they were living in a period that was very, very, you can say, unstable, and thus they were not able to consolidate the system. लेकिन वो जो same element है subsidiary alliance system का, वो यहाँ पे भी present था. Is this clear? Counter view क्या है? That subsidiary alliance system से कोई मेल जोल नहीं था Chauth का. According to scholars such as Sardesai and Surendranath Sen, Chauth was just a tribute collected from hostile and conquered territories. Jadunath Sarkar thinks that the payment of Chauth simply saved the kingdom from the unwelcome presence of the Maratha soldiers and their civil underlings. But it did not impose any liability on Shivaji, any obligation of Shivaji to guard the region from foreign invasions or internal disorder. The Marathas looked only to their gain and not to the faith of their prey after they had left. केवल पैसे में इंटरेस्टेड थे, बाकी कोई मतलब नहीं था. Chauth was only a means of buying off a robber and not a subsidiary system for the maintenance of peace and order against all enemies. The land subjected to Chauth cannot therefore rightly be called spheres of influence. So Jadunath Sarkar, Surendranath Sen, Sardesai, G.S. Sardesai, ये सब लोग क्या बोल रहे हैं? That it was not anything like the subsidiary alliance system. Subsidiary alliance system was able to create British spheres of influences in the territory of their subsidiary allies. The British emerged as the protectors of the territory and sovereignty of their subsidiary allies. Marathas, however, did not have any inclination to provide this role, to play this role. They were only interested in extracting tribute. The Maratha enemies or neighbors simply paid them in order to end the possibility or remove the possibility of any future Maratha invasion or harassment. And finally, there is a third view which has emerged, which has interpreted Chauth as an instrument of feudalism. V.N. Dighe and S.N. Kanungo are the prominent historians who have put forward this point of view. They assert that in the time of the Peshwas, Chauth and Sardeshmukhi helped the growth of feudalism, which Shivaji wanted to put an end to. Kaise? Because during the time of the Peshwas, the ability or the power to collect Chauth and Sardeshmukhi was transferred from the Chhatrapati to the local Deshmukhs, to the local Sardars. Right? In the time of Shahu and his successors, the chiefs who raised men and money for realizing Chauth and the Sardeshmukhi in distant lands on their own, they were not under the control of the center at all. They could neither be expected to obey the royal orders nor render accounts of money they raised and spent. Okay? What is going to be the impact of this? They are going to become wealthier and wealthier, and as they become wealthier, they will be able to expand their domains, raise more men, construct more forts, purchase more cannons, right? They are going to be able to strengthen themselves. Ultimately, what is going to happen? They are going to become as strong or even stronger than the center. ऐसी सिचुएशन को क्या बोलते हैं? फ्यूडलिज्म बोलते हैं. ठीक है? The main cause for this was that the king himself showed no interest in distant operations. He was not in the position to do this at all. ठीक है? तो क्वेश्चन अगर है, to what extent do you think that the Maratha Chauth system resembled the subsidiary alliance system of Wellesley? कैसे आंसर करेंगे? In the introduction, सबसे पहले a short description of Chauth. How are you going to define it in a few words? It was a tribute extracted by the Marathas from the neighboring enemy kingdoms. Right? It took the form of a tribute and acted as a guarantee against Maratha invasions. Right? Its nature has been interpreted differently by different historians. सबसे पहले M.G. रानाडे क्या बोलते हैं? The Chauth system was equivalent to the subsidiary alliance system of Wellesley. The extraction of Chauth imposed an implicit obligation on Shivaji and his successors to protect the Chauth paying areas from foreign invasions. Second, Sardesai and Sen along with others क्या बोलते हैं? The Chauth system was not at all like the subsidiary alliance system. While the subsidiary alliance system was able to create British spheres of influence in the territory of the native states and allowed them to exercise enduring control over the activities of the native states, the Chauth system was not. Rather, it simply represented a military tribute with no accompanying obligation of protecting the Chauth paying states from foreign invasions, or even protecting them from the invasions of other Maratha chiefs. Okay? And finally, we have some other historians such as S.N. Kanungo, who have interpreted the Chauth system as an instrument of feudalism. With the breakdown of administrative centralization following the death of Shivaji, the frontier commanders became more and more independent. They began raising campaigns into the or leading campaigns into the enemy territory on their own initiative, and the center had no real means of exercising any control over them or even ensuring the flow of the Chauth and Sadeshmukhi collected from enemy territories to the center. This led to the relative weakening of the center and the strengthening of the other Deshmukhs, and thus Chauth served as an instrument of feudalism. Conclusion. वही ना, सारदेसाई, सेन, जदुनाथ सरकार, राइट. उन्होंने क्या बोला? इट इज नॉट द सेम एज सब्सिडरी अलायंस सिस्टम. सब्सिडरी अलायंस सिस्टम वाज एबल टू क्रिएट स्फीयर्स ऑफ इन्फ्लुएंस. चौथ वाज not. There was no accompanying obligation on the Marathas to protect their so-called subsidiaries from foreign invasions. Right? Conclude कैसे करोगे? On the basis of this analysis, it becomes clear that the Chauth and subsidiary alliance system had some similarities, but they were simply superficial. While the subsidiary alliance system was an imperialistic tool used by the British to enhance their influence without war, the Marathas had no such vision and considered warfare to be the chief method of expansion. ठीक है? तो क्योंकि क्वेश्चन में शुरुआत में ही आपसे पूछा गया है कि how to what extent do you think that the subsidiary alliance system was the same as the Chauth system, तो कंक्लूजन में आपको बाकी दोनों के ऊपर बहुत ज्यादा बात नहीं करनी है. You can simply state that on the basis of the above analysis, it becomes clear that although Chauth and subsidiary alliance had some similarities, but these similarities were only skin deep, they were superficial. And then you will compare the subsidiary alliance system's impact and the Maratha strategy, right? Subsidiary alliance system was an imperialistic tool which sought non-violent conquest and expansion of British influence, whereas Marathas had no such vision and always considered warfare to be the chief method of expansion. So they did not have the vision of non-violent extension of their sphere of influence even in their surrounding territories. Clear hai? So this is how you can answer this question. Next question. Chhatrapati Shivaji was not only a military genius, but an administrative innovator and institution builder. Elaborate. Will you be able to address this? MG राणा डे का स्टेटमेंट क्या था? Like Napoleon, he was not only a military genius but also a builder of institutions and organizer, right? उसी को expand करना है. You'll have to expand upon his central administration, revenue reforms, etc., military reforms, right? Next question. Throw light on the evolution of the Maratha fiscal policy. हो जाएगा ये? Next question. Trace the process of Maratha political evolution from the 17th to 19th century. From the 17th to 19th century. Will you be able to address this? तो वही 3 phases उसी के बारे में बात करनी है. थोड़ा सा बैकग्राउंड भी देना पड़ेगा राइज ऑफ द मराठास को कि कैसे डेक्कन सल्तनत के एसोसिएशन में द मराठा स्टार्टेड इमर्जिंग एज अ पॉलिटिकल एंड मिलिट्री पावर, राइट? And following that, consolidation of power under Shivaji, who laid down the foundations of a strong centralized monarchy, after which there was constant evolution. So 3 phases में आपको इसको डिस्कस करें. I'm sure you'll be able to address these. हो जाएगा? चलिए then. That is it for this class and medieval India हमने खत्म कर लिया है. Congratulations. ये जो notes हैं that I'll be sending it over to you Telegram group पर look out, ठीक है? तो उस पर भेज देता हूँ. Online students, any doubts? Shall we end this lecture?